Well, welcome everyone to this Kingdom Finance Revolution live session. We're sitting here today on the 26th of September 2025, really looking for some direction. Like many of these weeks, there have been so much going on in the last few days since we last spoke that I had a host of things to be talking about. But I want to start like we normally start about the purpose, 1 John 3:8 purpose of why we do what we do. Why do we press in for kingdom finance? And the reason for it, somebody said recently, well, it's to provide laborers for the harvest. Well, that's right. I mean, we need laborers for the harvest. But the whole purpose of the harvest is to harvest people from what to what? From the kingdom of darkness to the kingdom of light. And the whole purpose of the kingdom of light is to partner with Jesus to destroy the works the devil has done, the works of the devil. So we're in a kingdom, we're in his kingdom. That's what it's all about. We move in kingdom level reality. We don't move according to the world, we move according to the spirit world linked in. And that sounds great. We kind of accept that in terms of dealing with stuff in church. We accept that from our religious leaders. But, I heard some prophet coming out with some meaningless drivel today about how we shouldn't get involved in politics or political speech. Well, hang on. How do you engage yourself in the world without being involved in what's going on? How do you raise a righteous standard if you're restricted to your church territory and the only people that see you are in church? The righteous standard has to be raised in the presence of your enemy. And I think that's what we learned through the Charlie Kirk assassination and the events following that, the martyrdom of Stephen. Stephen, when he was being martyred, and we're going to end up on a little bit on him today, he didn't try and placate his attackers, the people that were upset with him. He didn't try and, find this gentle path. Well, let's get somebody that's nice to mediate between us. No, he knew that he was in an existential battle between good and evil. And he knew that evil was out to do what evil always does, which is what? Evil comes to steal, kill, and destroy. So you're against a destructive force. Now, not every human being is out to steal, kill, and destroy. To the extent they're motivated by Satan, you're going to see that happening. And we've talked about that the last few weeks. What happens when you raise a righteous standard and the enemy rises up to want to kill? That's the spirit of murder, the spirit of Joseph's brothers. And the church does what the church always does. Christians do what Christians always do. When Elijah stands in front of the altar and he asks them this day, who will they serve? They were basically silent in the story. They waited to see what happened. When the fire of God fell on the altar, then they rose up and did what God had wanted them to do. So we have this silent, passive church, which I spoke about last week, the castrated church in a way, making that reference to eunuchs. So I'm going to mix today a little bit of what's going on in the world. I had to pick something, so much going on. And then I want to try and link that to what the Bible talks about and make some references to that. So first off, I'm going to take from an Elon Musk podcast, which he put out, which is actually quite good. But his core claim on the profile of radicalization. So remember, we raise a righteous standard, we have speech. That speech is in the presence of our enemies. So it's in these mountains of culture. There's no point speaking elsewhere. Nobody's going to listen to you. You're not going to get people saved if you aren't going to people change their mind. People aren't going to hear what God says about male and female and life in the world and being our brothers. You're not going to hear these messages if you're not speaking them where the people are. So this business of avoiding political speech, don't get involved in a protest, don't get involved in a walk where you're raising, this is just left-wing talking point nonsense, right? We need to be engaged. We need to be engaged. Nonviolent. Nothing I do or say will ever be to promote or glorify violence. And even the Old Testament language that we use, I treat that for our purposes as sort of metaphorical in nature. When we talk about dealing with something, well, we've moved to the point where we deal with it not by armed bands, we deal with it through the courts and the political system and the powers. And we hope that continues with a workable system for a long, long time. So Elon Musk podcast, back to that, his core claim, and he was dealing with the way that people are radicalized into political violence. And that's sort of what I'm going to talk about today. I will make the bold statement that political violence is not unique on the left. We have right-wing political violence as well. We reject and denounce all political violence. However, I will make the bold statement that right now we're seeing in this world dramatic rise of so-called left-wing or far left rhetoric, and that rhetoric is driving violence like the assassination of Kirk. So here we are, Elon Musk podcast. The core claim was that after the alleged shooter Tyler Robinson's online footprint surfaced, that the Democrats' legacy media, etc., were panicking, right? Because why? Because it undermined this narrative of political violence. They tried in many ways to park political violence on the so-called Christian conservatives, the radical Christian nationalists. They're trying to invoke Nazi imagery when they say that, Christian nationalists. Just imagine all these Christian nationalists goose-stepping around. And that's the picture they tried to create for the last 10 years. So this dramatically undermined the narrative. So what we have coming out from this is a very, very complex web of radicalization. How do you take a young man from a so-called normal family and then within a few years turn him from a sort of normal kid into somebody that is capable of hating and getting enraged to the point where he takes a hunting rifle within a complex plan and shoots a leading Christian figure? How do you go from A to B? Right? Obviously, we know how you go. Satan is a roaring lion seeking who he can devour. This thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. People open themselves up to the thief, and the same patterns repeat. But I think we can learn a lot from how this is working. The Discord chats, which are all radical. The fact that young people, particularly people like this, withdraw from the broad sense of society. They meet with their family. They have arguments about right wing, left wing, and Christians. So they withdraw. They withdraw further and further into an echo chamber, which is online. You add to that echo chamber online defilement, the kind of weird sexual behaviors, transgender ideologies that we're seeing violence emerge from, and you have this incubating den. So what's coming out, and we may track this, I want to do a shorter session today, but what's coming out is an amazing web of online groups which are radically violent, including transgender gun clubs and the idea that the only good Nazi is a dead Nazi, and these ultra-violent attacks and images. Indeed, the guy that shot up the immigration center yesterday in the United States had used the same gun apparently as the Charlie Kirk assassin in tribute, and had researched and exactly what had been done there before he did his sniper shooting. And again, with anti-ICE, anti-Christian thinking behind it. So there's an online network of radicalization. This is the thesis from the Elon Musk's hour and a half or hour-long podcast, which is very well researched. There's an online network of radicalization leading to political murder. Now, we saw that with Islamist murderers. There was an online glorification of this caliphate that was being built, and there was grooming of terrorists online, isolation. We're seeing that further and further and further. Now, how can I say this with a normal face? I'm going to just say that the average right-wing Christian conservative, small c conservative, let's say. What do I mean by conservative? We believe in conserving the safe society. We believe in conserving the family life. We believe in conserving a culture where you can own your own home. We believe in conserving faith and freedom. I'm not talking about sort of tribalistic theocracies where we're trying to, we're not trying to put the Presbyterians in charge of everything and tell you how you can live and how you can eat and everything else. We're talking about these broad kind of things that we're trying to conserve that are in line with God's teaching. Online networks of radicalization. So there were fragments of his online activity that just painted a disturbing profile. Steam was one of these links, and the whole process was that the Dems were panicking, or Democrats, left-wingers were panicking because they were trying to frame this killing along a different line. They wanted it to be about the gun. And again, the point about the gun is that's a left-wing talking point. Focus on the gun. The gun killed him. Everybody agrees the gun is bad. So we can avoid what caused somebody to use this. Well, as I said on one group, focusing on the gun is interesting. It's kind of like focusing on crucifixion as a means of execution. Is it good? Is it bad? Should we have it? But if you say that Jesus' crucifixion was about the practice of crucifixion, you've denied his divinity, you've denied his humanity, you've denied everything that his life stood for. The mechanism an evil person uses to take somebody's life is not what we should focus on primarily when you're talking about somebody's life. If you have a table of 50 lines, the person's life and the reason he was killed is number one. Number 50 is whether he was crucified or hanged or shot by a firing squad. So what happened there is, and what will come out from this and what we're seeing online is just a movie played in real time about people squealing when something happens contrary to the narrative. And how do we shut this up and deflect from it? Indeed, we saw Jimmy Kimmel saying that it wasn't a radical trans-affiliated person that did the shooting of Charlie Kirk. It was a MAGA supporter. So he knew that was a lie. It was a bald-faced lie. He was challenged for it. His show was canceled for it. And then all of the left rose up to make this the issue, that somehow there was a suspension of free speech because he couldn't lie about Charlie Kirk's assassin. And we'll see where that has led us. But my point was that left wing sits more and more in groups, many of them being drawn more and more into isolation. When they're challenged, they're so shocked at being challenged on a Christian forum or whatever else. It's like, oh my God, how do they deal with this? They can't believe that anybody has an opposing views. Indeed, my views were called abhorrent by one of them. So we have this echo chamber. Why is the right not the similar echo chamber? Well, listen, some of them are. We've been dealing with some of the radical sort of alt-right, and I can tell you there's some weird stuff going down that well. Don't want to go down that conspiracy well at all. But in terms of the mainstream right-winger, if you will, or conservative, people that the left would call Christian conservatives or right-wing, let's use that approach, we are inundated by the paper, Financial Times, the TV. We see the narrative that is out there, let's call it the mainstream or legacy media narrative. We are not blind to it. The difference is we have other sources. There's some people listening to me that hear a different view. You can accept it, you can reject it, you can do your own research, you can go and listen to what Elon Musk said, but you can come to an understanding because you have an alternative view that is being presented. And indeed, that's what should happen. And what happens as people move into echo chambers, then the room in the middle where people can talk gets narrower and narrower. And then the violent extremists come out of the woodwork to enforce that separation. You can't say that. Some things we just or too, as the killer said, too difficult to deal with. Yeah, we're going to take care of it. So what is this rhetoric that's going on that's leading to this polarization? I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. I'll just give you some quotes of the rhetoric and polarization. Joe Biden called Christians extreme MAGA, like fascists. Maxine Watt. I won't even get into the UK stuff because it's equally bad here, equally bad in Europe. Maxine Waters said, create a crowd, push back, tell them they're not welcome anymore, anywhere. Well, when you create a crowd and you're pushing people and you're pushing them out, that's violence. Eric Holder, when they go low, we kick them. Um, Senator Tim Kaine said, Democrats must fight in the streets. All that we've been seeing, fighting in the streets. And there's thousands of these. I could have filled your inbox with a week's worth of things. AOC described the U.S. border detention sites as concentration camps. They're talking about people masked Gestapo coming and dragging people off these death cults. Jasmine Crockett called Trump a Temu Hitler, which means a dime store version. Charlie Kirk was assassinated directly after those statements. September 11th, the next day, the World Socialist website, which is well followed by these people, labeled Kirk as a fascist and basically said that what people were doing is doing a Horst Wessel approach. They're trying to make him a martyr to promote their Nazi beliefs. In other words, we need to kill a few more. And many people have said that. And then immediately after that, the book was put out, Why Fascists Fear Teachers, and that was completely directed at the Christians and people in power. You have this huge rhetoric of Abolish ICE that we've seen. And what is that? What did that lead to? I think it was yesterday or the day before, the ICE field office shootings, rooftop killer. He had anti-ICE stuff written in Sharpie on his cartridges. 2 people killed, I think. One killed and 2 critically injured. August 14th, 2025, just before this, a border agent was killed in a traffic stop. And there's been mass violence at these sites. How is this programming working then? Well, it is. ABC News report that 87% of Democrats view Trump as a fascist. 47% of Democrats say the rise of fascism is their top political concern. And 55% of Americans on the left believe assassinating Trump would be at least somewhat justified. So the 55% that are saying that the murder of a leader is somewhat justified is what leads to people on the fringe or that are susceptible or that are radicalized online to believe that what they're doing is laudable and right. So how do you deal with this on the left then when you have an example of radical left-wing political violence? Well, you accuse the victim for the crimes. Or you point at right-wing extremism dialogue, or you point on, well, this is going on both sides, use the both sides deflection. Or you deflect into say, well, let's talk about guns, let's talk about this, let's talk about the other. But we've also had people ramming crowds with their cars. So it isn't the instrument of violence, it's the heart, the demonic heart of violence that is the key. This arises from a left-wing protest ecosystem. I'm going to just summarize some of Mike Benn's teaching on this, but he basically is alleging the color revolution playbook is being used at home. So the NGO infrastructure that's used for regime change, democracy promotion, which is or was tied to various grants, USAID, and then to private foundations, and then NGO trainers. So these NGO trainers teach people, there's actually courses on it now, on how to mobilize a mass demonstration and apply political pressure. In other words, how do we riot? How do we organize riots? How do we make these things happen? These NGOs they call it war gaming. War gaming and rapid response. They've got apps that track when ICE officers are seen. They know where they are. They're tracking their families. They're doxing them. So you're creating this war kind of cabinet approach to dealing with rapid response and attack. Indeed, if you look online, you'll see the recent attack on an ICE facility. I counted there was at least 30 people with GoPro cameras trying to get images of violence so that they could engineer it. And of course, the people that were in there to get the violence, they were pre-programmed or pre-agreed who would be the ones going in there, and they would be arrested. And in many cases, they knew they were going to be doing things to be arrested, and then they had their lawyers waiting and everything else. And in many cases, the left-wing system sort of simply boots them out. And the key behind this protest ecosystem, of course, is massive funding. Many of these protesters are well-paid agitators. So you'll see the same person at a socialist rally. The next time you'll see him at a pro-Palestine, anti-Israel rally, chanting from the river to the sea. They don't know what river, they don't know what sea, but they're chanting. And then you'll see them at the next place. So professional rioters, and many of those have been tracked. So these funding pipes are what Mike Benz talks about. And the reason I'm going through this is it will link immediately to what happened yesterday, okay? He says there's then a training layer. They call it professional movement schools. They're providing toolkits for protest skills, recruitment, escalation, bird dogging, media tactics. And you can see this happening. There's an ecosystem of formalized, I would call it, in my opinion, illegal behavior. But indeed, there's a formalized process. These riots are not spontaneous. Right? They aren't. When you see a spontaneous riot, you'll see something very different. These riots are not spontaneous. So the bottom line to Mike Benz's thesis is that there's a government/NGO philanthropy nexus where money goes down a waterfall, getting increasingly evil activities. And then somewhere there's this misty layer where this money goes across to actual violent activity. So you move from rent a riot, as he's called it, to a group of people that are really anti-Nazi, that believe what's being said, that people are Nazis. They're motivated by some kind of a death cult, and perhaps they are struggling with certain issues. And the next thing you know, you're into massive and evil political violence. We've seen the Denver shooter was trans, the Aberdeen shooter was trans, the Nashville shooter was trans, the Georgia shooter was trans, the Philadelphia shooter was trans, the Iowa shooter was gender fluid, the Uvalde shooter was trans, the Colorado shooter was trans, the Minnesota shooter was trans, Charlie Kirk's shooter was trans adjacent, and the attempted murder of Justice Kavanaugh was now revealed to be trans as well. So where are we at in the cycle of these things? I don't want to take too long on this, but think about the 2020 Summer of Love, this BLM-related Summer of Love that came after George Floyd death and some of the things that went on after that. At least 17 deaths. Some later estimates are approximately 25. Insured losses were 2 billion, according to civil disorder costs, but some say more like 10. In Kenosha alone in August 2020, there's 50 million damage to buildings. Seattle, there were multiple shootings. A 19-year-old and a 16-year-old were killed there. Portland Federal Courthouse, 3 federal officers had serious eye injuries during the attacks there. And there's thousands of people that were beaten and treated very difficultly. So we have this ongoing. We have massive attacks on border facilities and ICE facilities, and that wave of stuff is starting to dribble across into Europe. I think in much case, the left-wing activity in Europe might be pro-Hamas oriented, sort of that red-green alliance, but there's still some of it happening. So there's massive and widespread coordination with something called swatting, Swatting. And some people have been swatted multiple times. And what is a SWAT? Somebody phones from your house. They can make the phone seem like it's coming from your house and say that you have just killed your wife and children and you're threatening to kill anybody that comes to the door. And you've been shooting indiscriminately with a high-powered rifle. So the only way to respond to that is for a SWAT team to come ready to kill, fingers on the trigger. If you happen to come to the door in the wrong spirit, you might be riddled full of lead. And that's happened to most, if not all, um, conservative right-wing so-called Christian nationalists. Indeed, just a few days ago, the swatting attacks against Marjorie Taylor Greene from 22 to 24, they made arrests of a network. Massive and widespread coordination to attempt to kill somebody by a police-related incident. And also tied to a fatal crash because somebody was killed when there was a response to these false complaints. J.D. Vance quoted YouGov poll, 24% of liberal Americans say it's acceptable to be happy about a political opponent's death, and 26% say that political violence is somewhat justified. So the reason, why am I saying this? Because we are being attacked by a narrative that you can't call out a group, a so-called left-wing side of the spectrum for what's going on. You can't call them out. And we have to call them out. We have to call out what's wrong. We have to know what the issue is before you can seek to address it. You need to. So when people like Jimmy Kimmel skirt the truth, then refuse to take accountability for their actions, that sends a signal that there's this whole institutional machinery, the apparatus that's prepared to defend evildoers, and that's not okay. And indeed, as a result of that and the statements by Jimmy Kimmel and others, the majority of Democrats believe that Charlie Kirk was killed by somebody on the right, which then drives a whole host of conspiracy theories of multiple shooters. I mean, the truth will come out as to how he was killed, but there's no doubt with the information we have today what the basics part of it is. Comes from the universities as well. 3 professors stating what? We actually need to crash the US. We must stand with the armed resistance, Germany's not exempt. They said the people that were defending the racist, Charlie Kirk, are like the devil. We had a prophet in Scotland saying that people that rose and marched to honor Charlie Kirk are not of God. They've lost their connection to the spirit or something like this. I couldn't listen to it. It was so sick. The University of Pennsylvania stands by a top professor who shared a post calling Charlie Kirk head of Trump's Hitler Youth, i.e. we need to kill these people that are part of Hitler Youth. The same university, I think, has a club now, that the anti-fascist club that it says it openly celebrates every time a right-winger is executed. So we have massive networks of swatting attacks. We have all of this stuff going on. And then up until Trump's election, we then had all the organs of the state and civil society going after Christians for praying at abortion clinics, debanking groups, taking people away from everything they are doing. So where are we now in this existential battle against the radical cults that are trying to kill us? September 22nd, 2025, just after Charlie Kirk's memorial, President Trump signed an executive order titled Designating Antifa as a Domestic Terror Organization. Antifa stands for anti-fascism. It's a European organization, as far as I can tell. I think they're going to be dealing with that. But designating it as a terrorist organization means they can go after all of the funding. They can go after the thread op, which is why I went through the time of saying that part of the structure is the funding and payment of all of these activities. Of course, what are we going to hear from the left? Oh my God, Trump's going after his enemies. He's going after political people that are not of his framework, that completely ignoring the scorched earth policy we've had that we're just getting through now. We're just now seeing the first indictment for some of the crimes committed during the Russia hoax era. And even then, Comey is only being indicted, as far as I can tell, for lying to Congress, a charge for which he probably will get off with the sympathetic jury. Not the major crimes of what actually went on in that conspiracy. But that's a key moment, that designation. Last night, President Trump signed a presidential memorandum, which is described as an executive order, launching a government-wide strategy to counter domestic terrorism and organized political violence. And this instructs Treasury to use terror finance tools to trace and disrupt funding, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Read it. It's very well worth reading, or watch the clip on YouTube. What this does, and I want to draw your attention to it, is it draws a right, bright, big red line through all of the activity that we've discussed above. All of the activity of lying and demonizing, and then the funding of radical violence, which is what's going on. And that's why it's necessary for people to hide the radical violence, blame it on somebody else. But this is happening, and it unleashes the tools of the state. Now, that makes me uncomfortable, in one sense, because none of us want to have the government, doing all kinds of stuff. But who else but a government can go after the vestiges of a government that took the controls into its own hand and was debanking people and kicking them off social media and doing all of these things? If there was lawfare going on by the government, by prosecutors, who but the government can go after those evildoers that are still within the government? They call them the deep state or the administrative state, whatever your nomenclature is, doesn't really matter. Let's talk about criminal activity. So we have to, on one side, say it's disquieting. On the other hand, we need to say it's definitely needed, because we don't want to be shot by somebody because we happen to be going to church on a Sunday. We don't want our children shot by a trans lunatic shooting through the wall of a church. And we need people to rise up with sensible understanding of what's going on in the world around us. So I don't know if that is sobering for you. I've got lots of sources for anyone that wants to look into this more freely, but hopefully it will answer some of the Christians shouting out there, you can't point out things at the left. We can't point out things at the left. And by the way, when there has been a right wing, I can't think of the last right wing incident. I was thoroughly disgusted when Jussie Smollett was attacked and had a noose put around his neck, and everybody decried the offenders that would do such a horrible thing. Of course, he'd hired 2 Nigerians to do that at the end of the day. But where there has been right wing, so-called right wing, or Christian violence, I remember once years ago, a Christian guy, shot an abortionist doctor. That is not what we're talking about. We decry all of it. We decry political assassination. We decry political murder. We condemn it utterly. And where it rises up, let's be introspective and say, how do we get those people sorted? How do we stop some of this conspiracy stuff that's going? If people just want to be crazy, that's fine. But when they're crazy and it leads them to take a gun or a knife or a car and do something dangerous, then we need to address what's going on. And if you're part of the Nazi rhetoric, then you need to lower the tone. So I want to just touch briefly on some scripture about a place called, I think it's Topheth, Topheth, right? Topheth. It's a site in the valley of Ben-Hinnom near Jerusalem associated with child sacrifice. This is where they went to sacrifice children. And we're going to look briefly at how King Josiah defiled Topheth, which was foretold by Jeremiah. He said it would be the valley of slaughter. And Isaiah portrayed Topheth as a great pyre prepared for the king. And it's the same area that people talk about now as Gehenna. Gehenna, the valley of Gehenna, the place for judgment. So what happened to it at the end? We'll look at it at the end. King Josiah defiled Topheth as part of his reform so that no one could take a son and daughter and make them pass through the fire, be burned in the fire. How did he do it? He desecrated Topheth. He burned the bones of the priests of the false gods on the altar. So he defiled it in terms of destroying it and burning the bones of the priests on the altar. And we spoke about this last year in terms of the process of Reformation. When you're bringing Reformation to a nation, when you're bringing a change to a nation, you have to metaphorically destroy the instruments of evil. You have to destroy the death cults that are around you. That's maybe a little bit of what we're starting to see. Some actions to dismantle the homicidal death cults that resulting in all of these things happening. In Jeremiah, it says about the same valley. Therefore, behold, the days are coming, says the Lord, when this place shall no more be called Topheth, or the valley of Ben-Hinnom, but the valley of slaughter. That was fulfilled when Josiah slaughtered the priests of these evil gods on the same place. And then Jeremiah 30:33, for Topheth, a place of burning and abomination, has already been laid out and long ago prepared. Yes, for the Assyrian king and the god Moloch, it has been made ready, its pyre made deep and large with fire and much wood, the breath of the Lord like a stream of brimstone. A stream of brimstone. So we see that valley, that place of judgment where these evil doers are destroyed. And it links to something I read in Stephen's defense. I think it's Acts 6, verse 42, 43. And he's describing the children of Israel in their idolatry, okay? And I'm going to make the parallels back to our nations right now. But God turned away from them, the children of Israel, and delivered them up to worship and serve the hosts of heaven. That's Asherah. As it is written in the book of Proverbs, did you really offer to me slain beasts and sacrifices for 40 years in the wilderness, O house of Israel? So this is a challenge in their face. He's raising a righteous standard in the presence of the Jews that would later stone him. And he's calling them out for the fact that when they were the children of Israel were in their trek in the wilderness, they say, oh, we worshiped God for 40 years, and God, through Stephen, is saying, actually, you worship the stars of heaven. 43, God answers it through Stephen, no, you took up the tent, the portable temple of Moloch, that's the god of child sacrifice. So we're back to this god of child sacrifice, and carried it with you, and the star of the god Rephan, the images which you yourselves made that you might worship them, and I will remove you, carrying you away beyond Babylon. So there's a judge, he talks about the judgment for the worship of Moloch. Moloch is what was worshipped in that valley, Topheth, right? The King Josiah later defiled. So they brought this defilement with them. So we spoke, I think it was last week or the week before, about Ezekiel 9:4, where God goes through the city, marking on the foreheads those who care, who grieve, who sigh and groan about what God cares about, the righteous. Everyone else is marked for destruction. Only the mark of caring about what God cares about sets you free. We have a mark as Christians, likewise, that identifies us as part of the elect. But I was reading before that this morning in verse 8, which is a precursor to that description. And it talks about revelation, and this is where I want to end up. Revelation. Then he said to me, I'm going to start to verse 8 on chapter 8. Then he, that's God, said to me, that's Ezekiel, Son of man, dig now in the wall. And when I had dug in the wall, behold, there was a door. And he said to me, Go in and see the wicked abominations that they do here. So I went in and I saw the pictures of every form of creeping things and loathsome beasts and all the idols of the house of Israel painted around on the wall. And there stood before us these pictures, 70 men, the elders of the house of Israel. And in the midst of them stood Jazaniah, the son of Shaphan the scribe, so somebody he identified, with every man his censer in his hand, the incense burner, and a thick cloud of incense was going up in prayer to these their gods. Then said he, that's God to Ezekiel, Son of man, have you seen what the elders of the house of Israel do in the dark, every man in his secret chamber? For they say the Lord does not see us. So what I'm saying to you now is that we have entered into a door of revelation that has been opened up, and it's revelation of the dark and dirty deeds of rulers that are being exposed right now and in this next season so that we can see. We see that through the actions that we're talking about happening, of starting to peel back the funding of evildoers. We're seeing it in the exposure that is coming. And we're seeing it more and more as these things are called out. Indeed, I mean, if you look at Trump's speech to the United Nations, it was like a bomb thrower going there. You may not like his style, but he certainly raised the place down by calling out wrongdoing and evil activity and what was really going on. There's exposure. There's exposure. We get to see what people are doing in the dark, every man in his secret chamber, for they say the Lord does not see us. Well, listen, we're declaring the Lord does see. Righteous standards are being raised. Exposure is happening. Things are starting to be dealt with. It's up to the church to do what? To do as we're instructed, to see what's going on, yeah, to see. God knew. He took Ezekiel to see. And there's three other places where he said, go and look, go and look, go and look. And then finally he says, go and see who's sighing and groaning over wrongdoing. So the judgment didn't just come to these people that were doing these evil things. It came to the crowd, to people that could care less, that didn't really care anymore that there was baby abortions going on. That didn't really care anymore about some of these issues, that are busy saying, oh, don't get involved in a march or a peace march because that smacks of political activity. People that are saying, oh, let's absent ourselves from these kinds of, let's not identify. Let's not be political. Well, brothers and sisters, we need to be political. We need to be engaged. We need to find out where the righteous standards are being, who's more likely to defend us. All right, if you have a choice of one captain that's going to sail you into an iceberg and the other one who's a very sober, prudent guy, which one are you going to pick? Well, you need to get in the camp of the one that isn't destroying your nation. All right, that is all we're talking about. And where they're hiding activities of pedophilia against young girls and grooming gangs and all of these kinds, hey, those are not the people to be aligned with. If somebody else is hiding activities that are happening with mass immigration or challenging people for even questioning what might be going on, what are the pros and cons of what's happening? No, those aren't the people. Over 12,000 people arrested in the UK for social media. Hang on, that is not the kind of people we should be voting for. I would say anybody that goes for that stuff, we know how to look at it. So we need to be looking at these things and saying, how can we best align? How can we exercise what most aligns with what we're talking about? I didn't start out to make this an advocate of any political approach or political party, but I do think we need to look at. Now, none of them are good. None of them are perfect. We're not talking about church. We're talking about the governing framework that most aligns with our values and allows us to continue and move forward with what we're doing. But as far as the false prophets telling us to somehow raise a righteous standard, but not so it doesn't offend anybody, please go back and read Stephen's defense. Please go back and see how he challenged a nation. Go back and read Ezekiel 8 and Ezekiel 9, where God does what? He takes you to the rulers and shows you what they're up to, shows you the defilement. And then think about how this was addressed. Prophesied first the destruction of Topheth, the destruction of that valley, and then how Josiah destroyed it and defiled it and made sure that it was scorched earth. They could never go back to it again. They could never go back to child sacrifices at that place. He completely demolished it. And that's the fight of evil. That's the Reformation that we're talking about. So when it comes to some of the things that have gone on, then what we need to be advocating is the complete and utter dismantling of architecture of evil. Complete and total dismantling. I mean, the left, the radicals do it. They spent billions destroying facilities for deporting people from the United States. They did. You just look into what was done, the destruction of capacity, so that anybody trying to come and do it wouldn't have the tools necessary to do it without billions and billions of dollars. I think almost 200 billion had to be allocated to rebuild infrastructure that was destroyed in the Biden regime. Scorched earth. They certainly know about scorched earth. And that's what we need to do now. We need to make sure that it's going to be very, very difficult for frameworks of isolation, for frameworks of oppression, for frameworks to be reestablished. We need to take these things down. We need to take down the domestic terrorism apparatus that allows people to steal, kill, and destroy more effectively. We need to raise a righteous standard. We need to then bring in what is kingdom. What is kingdom? What is kingdom? And you're never going to find kingdom if you aren't part of the discussion, because you won't have a voice. There's an old saying in financial circles, not in the room, not in the deal. If you're not in the room, your voice will not be heard. Not in the room, not in the deal. Well, brothers and sisters, we need to be in every room possible. We need to be in the medical rooms where we're discussing what happens with autism in children. We need to be in the medical rooms where they're discussing forced vaccination and some of these things. We need to know what's going on. We need to be able to communicate a righteous path and find the best answers and the best solutions. We need to be in the media circle so that if people are coming out with lies and distorting truth, that we can impose a cost. We can impose a cost. The other saying that I really quite like is people keep doing stuff until they're stopped. Rapists keep raping until they're stopped. Evil keeps eviling, right, until it's stopped. So this business of somehow, oh, we just be nice, we find the root causes. No, people need to be stopped. If you're a career criminal, you've lost your morality, you've seared your conscience, all you do is kill, rape, and murder. You're going to kill, rape, and murder until you're stopped. Therefore, we have to have people that are capable of going out and stopping them. Stopping them. And that means we have to move back to cycles where we have our social contract protected, where we have law and order protected, where we have these things working in our societies, and rebuild the ruins, rebuild the ruins. And guess what? Every ruin you're rebuilding, you're going to have to be fighting off people that are trying to stop you, because the enemy loves the ruins and desolation of our nations and our cities and our families. Amen. Well, Father, I just lift up this word of truth and revelation. I pray it will go into the atmosphere and sever chains of bondage and chains of lack of understanding. The people will understand, and particularly Christians will understand, that we are in a battle, and we have been in a battle. And right now, there's steps being taken that we need, one, to get behind and pray and support because we care about these things. Two, we need to pray that there's a constraint that people don't go too far because we don't need to empower tit for tat cycles. And we really want to see a kingdom now being established. That somehow the forgiveness and repentance and the tenderness at Charlie Kirk's memorial doesn't turn, because the enemy wants to turn people's heart back to revenge and wickedness. And I'm not saying I'm seeing that, I'm just praying against it. And our job is to go forward and decree a righteous standard in all of these things in the name of Jesus. Amen.